ways to divide them: recognition for Palestine, Mandelson and Epstein, free speech, renewables and oil. And in each case, absolutely failing. Hands were placed on shoulders, backs were thumped, awkward questions shamelessly dodged. It seemed, to quote Starmer's words, that we genuinely like each other. At times, the mutual admiration was so intense you thought, guys, get a room. The numbers around the deal, the $250 billion investment, are awesomely big. But as I said last night, I have a prickle of suspicion. Maybe all those huge tech and finance companies have come here as philanthropists, keen to do us a favour in return for sitting at a palace banquet. Maybe. What about the hot topic of free speech? The Trump guys are very keen on this until it gets too close. After the Charlie Kirk murder, the American TV host Jimmy Kimmel was abruptly removed from telly for saying something tasteless under the circumstances. He implied the assassin could be a right-winger, but was hardly offensive or dangerous in any way. Truth is, we are all in favour of free speech for ourselves and our friends. And few of us are steely enough, brave enough, to defend it for our enemies. And yes, I am thinking about myself and my angry reaction to Elon Musk calling for the downfall of the British government and civil unrest. We can't keep going to the law with this stuff. I wonder whether a renewed interest in fusty, old-fashioned values like respect, civility, dignity and kindness wouldn't heal 99% of our current trouble. And if that's right, perhaps today's love-in wasn't such a terrible thing. It didn't produce, to be brutal, much really hard news, but there were some interesting moments. Here is a quick refresher. The Trump-Putin relationship has had its ups and downs, and today, after talking to Starmer about Ukraine, it was very much a down.
He has let me down. I mean, he's killing many people, and he's losing more people than he's killing. Yeah. Russian soldiers are being killed at a higher rate than the Ukrainian soldiers. Yeah, he said, let me down.
And there were occasional genuine expressions of disagreement, particularly over Starmer's determination to recognise the state of Palestine imminently. Trump suggested this would be a win for Hamas.
A lot of bad things. You know, Hamas said that they're going to put the hostages up as bait. They're going to put the hostages in front of any attack. And that's pretty brutal. We haven't heard that one in a long time. So we have to remember that. So I have a disagreement with the Prime Minister on that score. Okay? One of our few disagreements, actually.
Trump's also keen on carbon fuels, drill, baby, drill, all that. And an American journalist tried to put Starmer on the spot for favouring renewables rather than North Sea oil and gas. Starmer didn't sound quite like Ed Miliband.
The mix will include oil and gas for many years to come.
Many years to come. What about free speech then? No criticism of one country by the other, and the PM tried very hard to smooth this over.
This country's had free speech for a very, very long time. It is part of who we are as a country, and it is the values that we fought for. We fought for it during the Second World War alongside each other, so we need no reminding of the importance of free speech in this country.
And finally, Beth Rigby of Sky News had a go at Trump over the obvious Jeffrey Epstein embarrassment and a certain former British ambassador.
The elephant in the room, Lord Mandelson, he is no longer the ambassador. Do you have some sympathy with him that he lost his job over historic links to Jeffrey Epstein? Thank you very much, sir.
I don't know him, actually. I had heard that, and I think maybe the Prime Minister would be better speaking of that. That was a choice that he made, and I don't know. What is your answer to that?
Well, some information came to light last week which wasn't available when he was appointed, and I made a decision about it, and that's very clear.
LBC's Natasha Clark was there. We all enjoyed watching it, Natasha, but was it perhaps mildly frustrating to be in the room?
Well, Andrew, I think really my hot take from this evening is that the Trump whisperer, Sir Keir Starmer, seems to have struck again here at Chequers. I think Donald Trump was very much well and truly buttered up from his historic second state visit and all that we saw, that royal flattery that we saw yesterday at Windsor and today at Chequers. Well and truly, I think the president was on his best behaviour. Yes, of course, it was a little frustrating to watch those disagreements disagreements at that press conference. 2 hours ago, just behind me, I was in the Great Hall, here at Chequers in that press conference. Journalists very much tried their best, as you heard just there from Beth Rigby, to tease out the disagreements that we know are there between the two men. And while I think there were, of course, a few awkward moments, of course, Trump saying that wind is a joke over Palestine, admitting that there is a clear disagreement there about recognising a state. Sir Keir even told to use the military in the Channel to try and tackle small boats. That's definitely something that Sir Keir does not agree with, warning that migration can really tear apart communities from within. I don't think there were any knockout blows there. It felt to me that Trump on Palestine, I think he held back there. He was quite polite, he was fair, he was even quite well mannered compared to occasions that we've seen him. He was also keen to defer to Keir Starmer on some of those very difficult questions, like you just heard on Jeffrey Epstein. And speaking to people in Number 10 tonight, they say they're extremely happy with how everything has gone down today. One source said the state visit showed the US-UK relationship is stronger than ever. We've signed major agreements and secured huge investments into the UK, which will benefit Brits and make working people better off. And clearly, Donald Trump loves the pomp and pageantry that he's had here in the UK over the last few days. It was very evident from that press conference that he was feeling relaxed, he was feeling very appreciated. A lot of investment, of course, that £150 billion. But Andrew, lots of outstanding issues, I think, from this state visit. There was not a lot of progress, as far as I can tell, on Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, Israel, and even tariffs. At the moment, it doesn't look like there has been major strides there. And of course, what next for the special relationship? It's clearly been great to offer Donald Trump this, but what can we offer him next?
Natasha, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, in a moment, I'll talk to David Frum, the senior American commentator and former speechwriter to President George W. Bush. But first, let's speak to the chair of the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Emily Thornberry. Emily, welcome to the studio. I'm trying to get out of my head Natasha's image of Donald Trump head to toe covered in butter. But this is undoubtedly a close relationship he's got now with Keir Starmer. They were both bending over backwards to be nice to each other, two sort of political lovebirds. Should we be delighted by this or a little alarmed?
Well, I mean, I think the majority of the British public don't think terribly highly of Donald Trump, but they're pragmatists, and I think I feel the same. I think that it is a good idea for Donald Trump to have a political friend who is sensible and who is going to use all his efforts to try and push him onto the right path, because, you know, he needs to have some other friends apart from Netanyahu and Putin.
I was talking to somebody earlier on who said that Donald Trump very, very rarely gets an hour plus sitting with anybody else and talking in detail about foreign policy, and that happened today.
Exactly, you that's exactly where I was going. So he spent an hour with Keir Starmer, and of course also Keir Starmer also talked about it, particularly in relation to Gaza and to Palestine, that there are teams from both Britain and America working together on some sort of roadmap to a future peace. And I know that everyone is focusing, and I understand why, on the one time when President Trump said, we don't agree on this, which is on the recognition of Palestine. But I think that if you listen carefully to what was being said, he did said, Donald Trump said that it talked a lot about the hostages. One understands that, about Hamas are using the hostages, how the hostages have to be released and how there has to be peace. But then very little thereafter.
He also implied, jump in, he also implied that if the hostages were released, that would be the moment to put pressure on Netanyahu to stop the attacks on Gaza City.
Exactly. And there needs to be a peace, and there needs to be a long-term peace, and that has to involve countries such as Saudi Arabia normalising their relationship with Israel. But that's not going to happen unless there's some form of settlement in relation to Palestine. And what Donald Trump needs, I think, is sensible friends around him who say, we can fill in the details here, we can put together a peace plan. And and it isn't just us, it will be Saudi Arabia, it will be France, it'll be in a whole range of other countries. But, I think that despite the hour that they spent together, despite the public, statement of, well, I don't agree with the Prime Minister on the recognition of Palestine, I don't think they're that far apart. I still think that there is hope. And we do need to have Donald Trump on board if we're going to find a final peace in relation to Palestine.
An awful lot of what you just said, Emily, could also apply to Ukraine.
Yes.
And again, there was a conversation there. And again, this was one of those moments when Donald Trump was in a down mood about Vladimir Putin. Whether we can take any comfort from that, whether that means there's any chance whatever of a resumption or, serious tariffs against, serious blockades against Russia, I don't know.
So there's a bit of legislation which is in the Senate at the moment. And when I was on the Hill and talking to people didn't really think that it was going to go anywhere. And it's essentially to put sanctions against any country that buys Russian oil. But most countries buy Russian oil. I mean, China and India and a lot of European countries buy Russian oil. The European countries say they buy Russian oil only when the oil price is really low, and they won't buy it when it's going to help and give particular profits, which is a bit of a fudge. But the difficulty
So you think Donald Trump's got a bit of a point there?
Oh, I think he's got a bit of a point. But obviously the problem is that many of these countries can't heat their homes without Russian oil. So, so there is definitely
hard choices, yes.
But I think that for Donald Trump, it's an easy way out. It's we could introduce these sanctions, we could introduce these tariffs, we could do this. It won't cost us anything. It won't cost us anything militarily. And to a certain extent, it puts responsibility back into the court of the Europeans. So I think that I agree with you in relation to Ukraine. I think there was less positivity in relation to that than actually I felt in relation to Palestine. Despite him saying he doesn't like the fact that we're recognising Palestine, he didn't use it as an opportunity to criticise us.
So much could have gone wrong in this visit and didn't. Almost any minute something could have gone seriously wrong and nothing went wrong. I think we can agree that the Prime Minister has had a miserable and very, very difficult few weeks. Do you think this has been his best day so far?
Well, it's probably been his best day for a few weeks, yes. And it was certainly a high wire act. And absolutely, I was sitting on the edge of my seat watching it and thinking, how is anybody going to answer that question? Yeah. And what's the next one? And you're right. I mean, he was definitely on his best behaviour and had been thoroughly charmed. And we need to be in that place. I think we need to be good friends with the American president, whatever we may think of him personally, because he is a source of a huge amount of power, and we need it to be used for good.
Emily Thornberry, thank you so much for coming into the studio. Let's hear now from one of the most respected political commentators in the United States, David Frum, the staff writer for The Atlantic, former speechwriter to George W. Bush, and host of the podcast The David Frum Show. David, thank you very much indeed for joining LBC tonight. From what you saw, have you seen Donald Trump bend over backwards to be affable and helpful to another foreign leader, quite in the way that he did today with Keir Starmer?
No American president, certainly not since 1945, has done such deep, such sustained, such malicious harm to Great Britain over so long a period of time with so much malice aforethought as Donald Trump. And I understand the imperatives of diplomacy, but I think the British really need to approach this with their eyes open. Donald Trump was elected president after the Brexit vote. He was elected president. He was president, however, while Britain was deciding what to do about Brexit. There are many, many options about how to approach that vote. And Donald Trump consistently, as president said, choose the hardest Brexit, the one that gives you the most isolation from your previous customers and investors. And if you do that, if you follow my advice and separate yourself as remotely as possible from Europe, I will offer you a great US-UK free trade deal. In fact, through the first term, not only that never accomplished, it was never started, it was never serious. Britain was left alone in the world on Donald Trump's say-so, and now in his second term, he has piled tariff upon tariff about Great Britain. He took advantage of Britain in its hour of need. It's very nice that he's come and clinking glasses, but let's not forget the material harm he's done.
So below the sort of slathering mutual adoration society we saw today, you would say there's a much darker story. I'm very interested not just in the deep involvement of American tech now in the British state, in the military, in Whitehall, in the NHS, deeper and deeper and deeper, but also the impact of American tech and American Republican thinking on British political culture.
Well, this administration, especially Vice President Vance, has said again and again to Europeans that our highest priority in our relationships with you, and the thing for which we will punish you the most if you don't do, is that you give the widest possible regulatory space to our corporations. If you have different ideas about how Facebook should behave or Twitter should behave, and you have as big an economy as ours and some capacity to enforce your will, we will impose the heaviest possible sanctions on you. In fact, we are running U.S. trade policy as kind of a marketing firm for Meta and Twitter and all the others. And so Europeans have different views on these questions, but American power has been used in this way. And it's just part of the set plan of settled hostility. J.D. Vance was in Great Britain this summer and was interfering in British internal politics to favor the most extreme voices within British conservatism against more moderate voices, despite claiming to be a nationalist and a sovereigntist and believing in independence of states. In fact, the United States has been very aggressive in trying to reshape this administration, British politics. So I think you're dealing with people here who aren't friends. And I understand that diplomacy is about the art of dealing with non-friends, but have no illusions. They're not friends.
You make it sound, and perhaps this is me putting it too brutally, as if all the love-in today was effectively America giving Britain a kind of little pat on the top of the head in a kind of patronising way.
Well, I think Prime Minister Starmer is pretty open-eyed about what I've said. What he realizes is he came to power with Britain in a very dangerous and difficult and exposed situation. Severed from Europe. The long promise of a U.S.-UK agreement exposed as a lie, a knowing lie, and Britain in need. So it can't afford to make things worse. And Trump loves pomp and pageantry, so give him that. But do understand here that he's done enormous harm. Britain should either have been in Europe or should have had a U.S.-UK agreement, but now it's got neither, and now it's got a whole new round of Trump tariffs and threats that if you regulate tech companies in a way that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance don't like, or if you try to have your own independent politics, your own independent idea of what a conservative is that J.D. Vance doesn't like, you'll be punished for it.
One final thought about the former British ambassador in Washington, Lord Mandelson. Do you think he was really there to be the enabler for American tech?
Well, one likes to think that, Donald Trump, one theory is Donald Trump in his life seems to have had only one really true friend, and that was Jeffrey Epstein. The only pictures we ever see Donald Trump smiling in any sincere way are with Jeffrey Epstein. So maybe get another Epstein friend to deal, they can then have a bond together. They both loved Epstein so much, and maybe that could be the basis of some diplomatic relationship.
Well, that went well.
Maybe they both loved him too much, but one got caught and one hasn't been caught yet.
David, from a very, very good thought to end on. Thank you so much for talking to me tonight. Well, coming up, after one of the most well-known American talk show hosts was taken off air for comments about Charlie Kirk, I'll be talking to one of Trump's most prominent critics, his niece Mary, about the state of free speech in America. By the time now, 6:20.
This is LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
It's 6:22. Now, I mentioned the Jimmy Kimmel case earlier on, and there seems to be a bit of a political war against outspoken liberals in the wake of the Charlie Kirk shooting. Trump said he wants to designate the anti-fascist American campaigning organization they call Antifa as terrorists. Is there a chilling crackdown on free expression now happening in the land of the free? Let's talk to Mary Trump, the author, psychologist, and also the president's niece and one of his eloquent critics. Mary Trump, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What happened to Charlie Kirk was hideous and awful, and everybody condemns it. But are you concerned that there is, in a sense, an overreaction from the right of American politics and the group around the president?
Yes. First of all, thank you for having me. It's great to see you again. I'm deeply concerned. The ways in which the right have reacted so quickly and so thoroughly in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's horrific murder is having a chilling effect on not just prominent people like Jimmy Kimmel, but everyday citizens who are being punished through suspension or firing simply for expressing their views on their private social media accounts. And we're at this point where it seems that people at the upper echelons of the Trump regime don't even understand how speech is protected in this country. Hate speech is protected speech, first of all. There are limits to that, but generally speaking, we have very, very broad protections on speech here. So the other problem, though, is the ways in which their version of hate speech is being characterized. They're characterizing it as speech they don't like, speech they find offensive or critical of them, which is not at all the way it's supposed to work. And Andrew, one of the most concerning things here is the hypocrisy, because quite frankly, it is very often the right that engages in hate speech, that targets individuals based on their race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, et cetera. So the question then becomes, who is going to stop this? And we see a wholesale capitulation by corporate media here, basically bending the knee to Donald's very carefully constructed FCC. So yes, I'm deeply alarmed. Deeply alarmed.
I'm interested in the similarities between American law and Constitution and our common law, because here, basically, free speech is protected. You can be offensive, you can be rude, you can be obnoxious, you can be what you like. You can really hurt other people verbally until you get up to the point where you are likely to incite imminent violence or public disorder. That's the kind of barrier. Is it more or less the same in the States? And if it is, do you think the Republicans understand that?
That's exactly right. Targeted harassment that could potentially lead to violence. That is not protected speech. It's very specific, and I think it's pretty much the same here as it is over there. Do the Republicans understand this? I believe most of them do, and they're exploiting Americans' ignorance around these things with their hyperbole and, again, their very swift, unified action against anybody who just said anything at all about Charlie Kirk that was the slightest bit negative, or in some cases, people who were simply quoting Charlie Kirk's own words to put his role in the creation of our current political climate in context.
That's so interesting. Thinking about the way that the media operates, you were mentioning earlier on, sometimes you might say it's not the emperor who's at fault, it's all those who bend the knee to the emperor. If what we're seeing in your country is the republic giving way to the new empire, do you think the media moguls, that the owners and controllers of the big media companies, are complicit in what's happening?
I think they're very complicit, and the question remains, is it that they are operating in their short-term economic interests, or are they playing a long game in which they're betting that the Trump regime and whatever follows it will be the new norm, and they want to make sure that they position themselves to continue to profit off of that? So what we're seeing, and we've seen this for a long time here, but it's getting worse in a very short period of time, is people at the head of corporate media organizations essentially betting that democracy is not the way of the future. It is not the thing that is going to enrich them. In the meantime, they will do Donald Trump's bidding so that they can get their $6 billion mergers pushed through the FCC. And that is not a good place. That is not a healthy democracy by any stretch of the imagination.
And finally, a thought about my country. We've just seen today what I call the unlikely couple, Starmer and Trump treating each other as, very, very close friends, and an enormous amount of mutual flattery going on there. How do you think that Trump really regards Starmer, whose poll numbers are going down? Is this just a piece of sort of benign propaganda which disguises the real relationship?
Well, I think in some ways it's a flex for Donald, because he knows that Starmer is essentially kissing his ring for reasons I don't begin to understand, but that's a conversation perhaps for another time. And Donald has no use for or admiration for anybody who wants to exist within the framework of Western liberal democracy. In fact, Donald is doing his utmost to weaken the post-World War II order. So for me, for Starmer or any other leader of an EU country, I know Europe's not in the EU, but to genuflect in this way to Donald, knowing the harm he is causing, sort of mirrors what's happening in the United States of America.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching very carefully the two of them on the stage together. And when Keir Starmer was saying something particularly flattering or benign about Donald Trump and America, your president, your uncle has, if I may say so, kind of slightly alligator or crocodile eyes, which suddenly snap over. And you think, this man is not fooled for a second. This man knows exactly what's going on, and we shouldn't take his expressions of effusive thanks seriously.
Absolutely not. And it is just another instance in which appeasement is a slippery slope of its own. How much farther is this going to go? And at what point are people going to realize that continuing to give in is not going to make this end well at all?
Final thought, was the killing of Charlie Kirk a really important kind of inflection moment in the great political and cultural war going on in the United States? Do you see this as a truly dangerous moment for the liberal side of the argument?
Yeah, it should not have been. It was a hideous, as you said, it was a hideous act of murder, cold-blooded murder. Everybody I'm aware of on the left has condemned it. There have been outliers, and that's despicable. But this was an unacceptable act of political violence against a prominent figure, regardless of what you think of him or his role in the creation of our current, quite frankly, dangerous political climate. And it should be condemned. The problem is that the right is exploiting Charlie Kirk's murder towards its own ends. This could have been a unifying moment. This could have been a moment of exploration into trying to figure out how we got to this dangerous point. Instead, it is indeed an inflection point, and there are dangers that will lie ahead because of it.
Amen to that. Mary Trump, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. It's been a pleasure. Now then, up next, one of the few disagreements between the US and the UK is over the recognition of a Palestinian state, according to the US president himself. But what would actually change if and when we do recognise Palestine? Time now 6:30, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
Donald Trump has suggested the UK should involve the military in tackling small boat crossings, warning irregular migration could destroy countries. The US president says he discussed the situation with Sir Keir Starmer at the Prime Minister's country residence, Chequers. The government is facing another legal challenge against its one-in, one-out deal with France, hours after the first deportation under the scheme. A man who made a small boat crossing in the Channel in August was put on a flight this morning. And two teenagers have appeared in court charged over a cyber attack on Transport for London. It's understood to have cost TfL £39 million in September last year. LBC weather, spells of rain for central and northern areas tonight, lows of 10 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
Another late-night talk show host has been sacked, fired, cancelled. What is going on with free speech in America right now? You can catch up from our free Global Player app.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:33. Now, Labour MPs haven't had a lot to laugh about recently, but they'll be chortling at the revelation that the new left-wing breakaway party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, already seems to have split, with its other joint leader, Zara Sultana, accusing her fellow parliamentary rebels of forming a sexist boys' club. Let's talk now to our political correspondent, Aggie Chambre. Aggie, can we start by reminding people about this new party, your party? It doesn't really have a proper name yet, even that.
No, exactly, Andrew. This isn't the first row that this party has had. So basically, this is a new political party that's been set up by former Labour MP Zara Sultana, former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. And earlier today, an invite was sent out to members of the unnamed party, so far described as your party, inviting members to officially sign up in exchange for 55 quid. But then, Jeremy Corbyn and 4 other independent MPs who've set up an ad hoc parliamentary group with Jeremy Corbyn went on social media and described this as an unauthorised email and warned supporters not to sign up via the link. They said legal advice is being taken and that any direct debits should be immediately cancelled. Then Zara Sultana responded to their response to her email, and she said, after being sidelined by the MPs named in today's statement and effectively frozen out of the official accounts, I took the step of launching a membership portal so that supporters could continue to engage and organise. She said supporters of your party, not actually called your party, but you know what I mean, should sign up now. She said the portal was safe, secure, legitimate, and she said her sole motivation has been to safeguard the grassroots involvement that is essential in building this party. And then this pretty serious accusation from her, actually. She said, unfortunately, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a sexist boys' club. I've been treated appallingly and excluded completely. Now, I've gone to Jeremy Corbyn's person to ask if they have a response to that. Response, there came none. But as I say, this isn't the first row they've had ever since they've set up. Even before they've set up, they'd been having rows about the name. Is it actually going to be called your party or not? About the leadership. Is it going to be led by Corbyn? Is it going to be led as a joint venture? About when it was going to launch. Zara Sultana announced she was going to set it up before Jeremy Corbyn had agreed he was ready to go. Zara Sultana also reportedly clashed with one of those independent MPs I was just talking about their different views on trans rights. And in an interview with the New Left Review, Zara Sultana criticised Jeremy Corbyn's Labour for capitulating, those are her words, to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. And now this, Andrew. I think lots of people I've spoken to today suggest this really could be the end for your party.
It certainly sounds terminal between the two of them, Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. The words that you've just been quoting are quite extraordinary. And when you see the other side are taking legal advice, you know it's really serious. And for people listening, this is potentially relatively good news, not only for the Labour Party, because they will be challenging Labour candidates around the country, but also for Zach Polansky and the Greens.
Exactly. So this is when Zach Polansky actually won the leadership just a few weeks ago. People were saying, well, hang on, is this not going to in fact, you, Andrew, you said everything Zach Polansky could be said by Jeremy Corbyn. It really felt like he was parking his tanks on their lawn. Well, perhaps this is good news for him. And as you say as well, Labour, I think, grinning from ear to ear. One source said to me tonight, it feels like 2018 again, except now their incompetence has zero consequences, so we can just sit back and enjoy it. Scathing from them. Yeah. But I think they are really going to be thrilled about this.
Yes. Ambulances, I think, on the lawn rather than tanks, Aggie. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn parks tanks. But other than that, agree with everything you said. Thank you very, very much indeed for that. Now, 6:37, and I want to look at in more depth. There's a couple of the really big issues raised today at that press conference we were talking about earlier on. The first one of those is Palestinian statehood, and whether simply declaring it imminently will make a blind bit of difference. I'm joined now by Mustafa Barghouti, the General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative and head of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society. Mr. Barghouti, welcome to the show. An awful lot of people have been putting an awful lot of pressure on Keir Starmer on the recognition issue following President Macron of France. But my question is basically, will it change anything? Will it help your people on the West Bank? Will it help anybody in Gaza in a practical way?
Of course it will, but it's not enough, and I'll explain. recognition of Palestine is important and is welcome, mainly because it affirms the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people on their land in Palestine. This is so important because of the Israeli state-nation law that was passed even before the 7th of October, which said, and it was approved by the Israeli parliament, it said that the right of self-determination on the land of historic Palestine is exclusive for Jewish people, denying and negating the rights of the Palestinian people. So in that sense, that's an important step. Second, this recognition means that there is a true defiance from the international community to the Israeli plans of annexation of West Bank and ethnic cleansing of both West Bank and Gaza. For Britain in particular, this is an important step because Britain has been responsible for the so-called Balfour Declaration, which Palestinians and many people in the world perceive as a stab in the back of the Palestinian people when it affirmed the rights of Jewish people to have a state, but did not indicate that that is a right of the Palestinian people, who at the time owned 82% of the so-called historic Palestine.
So, sorry to jump in. From your point of view, this would right a historic injustice and give a little bit more of a legal stake to the people who are under assault and pressure at the moment.
Absolutely. But it's not enough. And why I say so? Because such recognition will not stop the crimes that Netanyahu is committing now in Gaza. And that's why we are saying that to stop the genocide that is happening in Gaza, to stop the acts of ethnic cleansing of millions of Palestinians, it is important that Britain and other Western countries that claim that they are committed to international law would immediately start punitive acts against Israel, imposing sanctions on Israel in the same manner that they did for Russia.
And in Britain's case, that would above all include stopping sending military parts to aircraft companies who are supplying the Israeli Air Force, for instance.
Absolutely. Military embargo is the first step that should be taken. But more than that, I think your government, the British government, has been complicit in the war crimes that are happening in Gaza because it sends its own military planes to fly over Gaza and provide Israelis with intelligence information. That is very dangerous because it means that Britain itself is participating in the war crimes, the most horrible war crimes that are happening in Gaza Strip. Punitive acts and sanctions are so much needed by Britain, by Western countries, or otherwise the world will see that what's being slaughtered in Gaza is not just the Palestinian people, but the whole idea of international law and international humanitarian law.
There is so much here still to unpick in terms of the British position. But for now, Mr. Barghouti, thank you very much for talking to me at LBC. Here is a really weird story. President Macron of France and his wife Brigitte have agreed to submit scientific evidence to an American court to prove that she wasn't born a man. They've been suing a right-wing US commentator, Candace Owens, who said that she would stake her entire professional reputation on the fact that Brigitte Macron is in fact a man. She's even given the alleged name. Now, this will be very embarrassing and intrusive for the 72-year-old wife of the president, but it does show the vast power of conspiracy theories on the internet. Let's talk now to somebody who is an expert in all of that, James Ball, author of The Other Pandemic, How QAnon Contaminated the World. James, thank you for joining me again. Can you start off by explaining to people a little bit of this internet conspiracy about Brigitte Macron?
There's a running set of conspiracy theories about various world leaders either being trans themselves or having trans partners. There was for a long time an obsession with Michelle Obama, obviously the wife of Barack Obama, that she was trans, as baselessly as Brigitte Macron. She has 2 children. Who we saw grow up in the public eye. Brigitte Macron became another fixation. I think part of it is an idea that it's a globalist obsession, that there's a cult running the world with very different values to everyone else. But it's particularly interesting in the case of Brigitte Macron because there is a fascinating scandal in how she and Emmanuel Macron met anyway. She was his school teacher. He was very young. There's a big age gap. And so there's a real strange story going on there. But Candace Owens has a lot of form on conspiracy theories, and she really latched onto this one, and she brought it to a huge audience, and it's incredibly intrusive, and it must be
absolutely
quite
horrible.
Distressing even. And France, of course, has a strong culture of privacy around its politicians. They really regard a lot of things that we would think of as fair game in how politics is covered as private. You know, affairs are often not reported in the media there. And so for this kind of intrusive, senseless and very, very shoddy conspiracy theory around her life to be there, I think they crossed the line so that they couldn't ignore it, as politicians usually do.
And I know that the Macron court case suggests that Candace Owens has been doing this to drive her own numbers and to drive her own income, in the sense that she is monetizing their misery.
Yes, Candace Owens sort of came up in politics. She was, for a time, sort of one of the main right-wing influencers. She had some involvement with Turning Point US, which was Charlie Kirk's organisation. He was, of course, slain last week. She was quite a pro-Trump voice, but she sort of fell out with her group on the right. She was in an organisation with Ben Shapiro, who's another sort of right-wing influencer. And largely for her, politics wasn't working out as well. And so she moved to celebrity and to scandal and found a whole new audience on TikTok, a whole new audience on several social networks, and became a huge influencer in her own right. She has hundreds of thousands of followers. She's worth a fortune. And this content does really well. And she goes very obsessive, very detailed. There's all sorts of claims about old pictures of Brigitte and how they show she was a man. They are, in fact, pictures of her brother. Brigitte has been in public life a long time. There are a lot of photos. And essentially, the argument the Macrons are making here is this isn't a mistake. This isn't an honest belief. This is reckless disregard of the facts. This is malicious. And so even in the US, which has a much higher bar for these lawsuits, they think they've got a good chance of winning. And it could really mark a line for this, especially for non-Americans, if they were to triumph. But as this genetic testing is showing, as this scientific evidence is proving, it's going to be very intrusive to fight this case.
Very intrusive, but perhaps essential. We've been talking a lot in this country about the way that the American online world is interfering in our politics in all sorts of ways. And I'm really interested in this being the French example. But I'd also like to ask you, we've talked in the past about this, but the extent to which AI is now supercharging some of the more malign theories, including the Great Replacement. I'm seeing more and more films which are clearly generated by AI, but are quite convincing, suggesting, fights and huge things happening on the streets of every European town and so on. Do you think that the latest technology is taking the conspiracy theories that have always been circulating around and just making them bigger, louder, and more dangerous?
I think we have two big problems, and they center around the business model of the internet. Attention is money, and attention can be got by anyone, and it doesn't go to the best quality. It goes to the best story or the thing that people want to hear. And so people are making this content because it gets huge audiences, it gets attention, and the most lurid stories sell. This is like yellow journalism. This is like the sort of Victorian era tabloid sheets going out for 2 pennies a time. AI makes all of this cheaper. There was always going to be footage you could distort. There's always a picture of a tank that you can say is somewhere it wasn't. There's always a fight you can say happened today. AI lets you customize those, lets you generate those, lets you do that in seconds, and it took hours before. So the cost of fakery is going down, just as the money that comes to you for doing it is going up. And growing profit margins, growing audiences, you're going to have a problem.
Absolutely fascinating. We are all going to have to wise up. James Ball, thank you so much for talking to me tonight. In a few minutes, I'm going to be joined by my political panel to discuss whether the state visit was a win for the Prime Minister or if Britain was once again being shortchanged in the so-called special relationship. At the time now, 6:48.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
When Trump helpfully suggested that Keir Starmer should follow his lead and bring in the military to stop illegal immigration, did you gasp or did you think, yeah, why not?
Ian Dale on LBC. Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:50. What a week for the Prime Minister. After hosting President Trump for an unprecedented second state visit, has Starmer ended this week in a stronger or a weaker position than when he started it? Well, let's discuss that with the political panel this week made up of Aubrey Allegretti, Chief Political Correspondent at The Times, and Joe Tanner, Political Communications Strategist and former advisor to Boris Johnson. Welcome to you both. You think things can't get any worse in the Labour Party when the arrival of Donald Trump in London is a kind of glorious relief, Joe?
Yeah, it was kind of, it's probably Starmer's best 2 days in the last couple of weeks,
I think
really,
that's
hasn't
true.
it?
Would you agree, Aubrey?
Yeah, I mean, there's some people saying it's his best couple of days since he became Prime Minister. I mean, certainly in terms of the big material guarantees that he extracted from Donald Trump in terms of the commitments on Ukraine and being able to push Trump into a corner where he was then directly criticising Vladimir Putin, which is something he's been quite remiss to do.
Yeah, that was very important. And as we were discussing earlier on with Emily Thornberry, it's pretty rare that President Trump sits in a room with one other person who understands the world a bit and discusses foreign policy for an hour.
Yeah, and I think the optics of, let's be honest, there's a political element to this, and there was that whole kind of let's just put on a show. And I think that, that sort of warming, we talk about politicians not being able to roll the pitch. They rolled the pitch very well for Trump with all the pomp and ceremony, really giving him exactly what he wanted, which kind of warmed up the opportunity for that conversation because he clearly likes Starmer. There's definitely some warmth between the two. I'm sure they've got plenty they disagree on, but I think he sees Starmer as someone he can do business with. I felt Starmer looked slightly terrified at stages during the press conference, but I think that's just inevitable when you're stood next to... I used to work with Boris and I used to feel terrified in some press conferences.
What was he going to say next?
Exactly.
Aubrey, I agree. I think there is a genuine relationship there. I was very interested in the body language. A couple of times, Starmer put his hand on Trump's shoulder, and then when Starmer said something that Trump liked, he got a great belt across the back from Trump. That doesn't happen if there isn't some kind of genuine relationship there.
No, although, I mean, I suppose everyone is competing to be sort of seen as part of the bromance. It's something that we've heard so often between various political leaders, whether that's Macron and Trump. Even Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden used to sort of try and show off that relationship. So it's part and parcel of the presentation element of this. And you have to wonder, coming out of the press conference, how much Britain has gained. OK, we're all sat here saying nothing went drastically wrong. But
that's
what
the
do we
bar
have
these days. The bar is let's not screw this opportunity up. That's where we've got to, haven't we, on the world stage?
Absolutely. But I think Aubrey takes us into the really important part of the conversation, which what's it all really about? There's Blackstone, there's Palantir, there's lots of big American tech companies. But these deals either mean that they are buying British companies and one day presumably taking the profits and taking the intellectual property back to the United States, or else we are buying their stuff, we are buying their product. We're buying Palantir's product for our military and the NHS, and we're buying Oracle's product right across Whitehall, and so on. So is this really a great deal for Britain?
I mean, I don't know if we know yet. What I would say is I think given how much the country was talked down when the government first came in and they said how awful it was, there is some degree of, you can sort of chalk it up as a win, that there's a sense of confidence and sort of optimism about doing a deal with the UK and getting involved in the UK. There will always be devil in the detail, and I'm sure we'll see over the coming weeks there might be bits of it we don't like. But primarily, there is something about a sort of demonstration of confidence that there is doing business with the UK. When the UK's been kind of saying, look, we're skint, we've got this huge debt and our productivity's on its backside. It's a good start. And maybe it's not enough, maybe it's not everything, but we've got to start somewhere.
Joe, that's a really well-made point. But Aubrey, coming back to what you were saying earlier on, we won't know for a while exactly what the deals are. It is a very large amount of money. Do you think that, in terms of Starmer, this is a moment when he can start to turn the page, his favourite expression, on what has been the most grisly, miserable few weeks of his Prime Minister?
Yes, does it mark the start of phase 3, perhaps? I mean, I'm a little bit more cynical. We've been told by cabinet ministers that they're not going to make changes to the digital services tax, and that there haven't been assurances made to these companies about effectively watering down Britain's copyright laws to give big tech companies access to British creatives' materials, which they're very upset about. But Donald Trump is not somebody that rolls over.
He is going to come here because they're feeling charitable, didn't they?
No, exactly. I mean, these are business people, and Donald Trump is a business person himself. So I suspect the devil will be in the detail. But in terms of Keir Starmer being able to say, I'm playing the statesperson who's no longer bogged down and mired in these political scandals that have plagued me for the last few weeks, it has helped him turn the page on that. Not least as well because it's recess. MPs are back in their constituencies. Yeah. They can't be sort of fretting over each other. And the deputy leadership contest that's been going on in the background has largely subsided.
I was about to say the words, at least no one's talking about the deputy leadership campaign. And then you've spoiled it for me, Aubrey. But Joe, let's talk a little bit about that, because all the information that we're getting, it may have subsided a bit, all the information we're getting is that Lucy Powell, who is in effect the anti-establishment, one of the two candidates, is going to beat Bridget Phillipson. How serious do you think that's going to be for Keir Starmer?
I mean, I'm not even sure if it's just whether she wins or not. I think the process to get there is going to be pretty bruising. We've got the party conference season around the corner. That is going to be completely derailed. This was an opportunity for, the government, for the leadership of the party to sort of talk about their agenda and what they were going to do and how they could, to some extent, get the show back on the road. That it hasn't felt has been particularly, it's been a veering vehicle, as it were, in terms of where they're getting to with their agenda. And instead, they're going to be hitting party conference with all sorts of narrative, concerns, questions, criticism, protests and all sorts. So I think
it's going to be a belter.
That's the thing. Yeah. So I think the actual end of the result is one thing, but I think getting there is going to be pretty damaging. And it's what you're left with at the end of it as to how Lucy decides to play it.
And Aubrey, hanging over Liverpool will be Manchester, as it were, in the form of Andy Burnham and the possibility of him coming south and challenging Starmer for the leadership. Just tell people listening a little bit about Andy Burnham and why he might be a threat to Starmer.
Certainly. So he was briefly a cabinet minister under the last Labour government. He's sort of viewed in some ways as Boris Johnson was when he was sort of deposed, as a kind of knight over the water. So people like to sort of flirt with the idea of him and sort of transplant their ideas of what they think he'll do. He's been the mayor of Greater Manchester, quite sort of widely praised for his tenure up there. And he is closely associated with Lucy Powell. She's a Greater Manchester MP. So this race has been viewed in part as a proxy sort of referendum on Starmer's leadership by the Labour members themselves and by MPs. There is a stat that I sort of looked at today that I think is very interesting, which is that of all the newly elected Labour MPs, there are 74 that backed Lucy Powell for the leadership and 28 that haven't backed anyone. And that suggests that there are a significant number of new Labour MPs who are not willing to listen to what they think the government line is. Now, I should stress that number 10 says this isn't, Bridget Phillipson is not the de facto Downing Street candidate, but there are lots of Labour MPs who are sort of openly backing a candidate who was sacked by Keir Starmer in the reshuffle earlier this month.
And the bit that we haven't got to is that Andy Burnham has oodles of charisma and has, the ability to know what a story is and jump in on it in a way that Keir Starmer's not necessarily as comfortable.
And if he beats Reform in a by-election, he can say to the party, not only am I the leader of the soft left, I'm the guy who can beat Reform on the ground, and that would be very, very
But that's his biggest challenge, is that you stand and you don't win, then you've ruined your chances.
It could go terribly badly as well. Joe, Aubrey, thank you both very much indeed, because I will be back with you on Monday. And if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you'd like them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. So download the official LBC app for free from your app store right now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But now it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. As the Donald Trump state visit draws to a close, I want to look at the response Donald Trump gave to a question on migration.
It doesn't matter if you call out the military. It doesn't matter what means you use. It destroys countries from within.
He said illegal immigration causes a country to disintegrate from the inside. I kind of agree with that. But when he helpfully suggested that Keir Starmer should follow his lead and bring in the military to stop illegal